My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 52 years old, and yesterday my son told me I was nothing to this family. Standing in the kitchen of the house I've owned for 23 years, watching him point toward the door like I was some unwelcome stranger, I felt something inside me finally shatter. "Mom, you're nothing to this family, leave now," David said, his voice cold and dismissive. My 28-year-old son, the boy I carried for 9 months, raised through sleepless nights, put through college with money I earned scrubbing floors and working double shifts, stood there treating me like garbage. His wife Sarah nodded approvingly beside him, her arms crossed, her expression smug. My daughter Linda, 26, didn't even look up from her phone. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator I'd bought with my first real paycheck 15 years ago. Everything in this house, every piece of furniture, every appliance, every improvement, I'd worked for it all. Yet here I was, being dismissed in my own home like I was the problem. If you're watching this story unfold from wherever you are right now, please hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. And I want you to see how a woman can reclaim her power when she's finally had enough. I looked around that kitchen, remembering how I'd painted those cabinets myself when David was in high school. I remembered the countless dinners I'd prepared, the homework sessions at that table, the birthday parties, the graduations. This house held 23 years of my life, my sweat, my tears, my dreams. But it also held 23 years of me slowly disappearing, becoming smaller and smaller until my own children couldn't see me anymore, until they thought I was nothing. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. David was still staring at me with those cold eyes, waiting for me to shuffle away like I always did when things got uncomfortable. Sarah was checking her nails like this whole scene was beneath her attention. Linda had finally looked up from her phone, but only to roll her eyes at the drama. That's when I realized something that would change everything. I didn't have to leave. This was my house. The story of how I got to this moment starts much earlier, back when I thought being a good mother meant sacrificing everything for your children's happiness. Back when I believed that putting family first meant putting myself last. Back when I thought love meant never saying no, never setting boundaries, never demanding respect. I was so wrong about so many things. The problems didn't start yesterday. They began the day my husband Robert walked out when David was 10 and Linda was 8. I remember standing in this same kitchen, holding his goodbye letter, trying to figure out how I was going to raise 2 children alone on a secretary's salary. "Don't worry, kids," I told them that morning, forcing a smile while my world crumbled. "Mommy's going to take care of everything." And I did. I took care of everything, everyone, every problem, every need, every want. I became the solution to every crisis and the answer to every demand. I worked 3 jobs to keep us in this house. I cleaned offices at night, worked at the insurance company during the day, and did bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. I never missed a school play, a parent conference, or a soccer game. I drove carpools on 2 hours of sleep and packed lunches with food I couldn't afford. The house became my fortress and my prison. I'd bought it right after the divorce, determined to give my children stability. It's a modest 3-bedroom colonial in a good neighborhood in suburban Chicago, with a small front yard and a back garden where I grew vegetables to save money on groceries. Every mortgage payment was a victory, every improvement a testament to my determination. But somewhere along the way, my children learned that I would always be there to fix everything, and I would never complain. When David got arrested for underage drinking at 17, I bailed him out and never told anyone. When Linda crashed my car at 19, I took out a loan to fix it and told the neighbors I'd hit a pole. When David dropped out of college for the 3rd time, I paid his student loans and let him move back home. You're the best mom ever, they'd say when I solved their problems. And I believed that being the best mom meant never saying no, never letting them face consequences, never allowing them to fail. David brought Sarah home 3 years ago. She was perfectly polite at first, all smiles and compliments about my cooking. But I noticed how she'd suggest changes to improve things. Margaret, wouldn't this living room look better with modern furniture? She'd say, her voice dripping with false sweetness. This wallpaper is so dated. When they moved in temporarily, after their apartment lease ended, Sarah immediately began rearranging things. My family photos disappeared from the mantel, replaced by her trendy decor. My comfortable reading chair was relocated to the basement because it didn't match the aesthetic. Linda followed her brother's lead, as she always had. When she lost her job last year, she moved back in too. Just until I get back on my feet, Mom, she promised. But getting back on her feet apparently meant sleeping until noon, leaving dirty dishes everywhere and bringing home different men every week. I watched my home transform into a place where I felt like a stranger. My children and daughter-in-law made decisions about my space, my belongings, my life, without consulting me. When I suggested they might want to find their own places, David would remind me how expensive rent was these days, and Sarah would mention how nice it was that we could all be together as a family. But I wasn't family to them anymore. I was the maid, the cook, the bill payer, the problem solver. I was invisible unless they needed something. The breaking point built slowly like pressure in a volcano. Every dismissive comment, every eye roll, every time they talked over me or made plans without including me, added to the mounting tension. 3 months ago, things started getting worse. Sarah announced she was pregnant, and suddenly my house became their house in ways I never anticipated. She started making demands about baby-proofing, about which room would become the nursery, about how we needed to renovate the upstairs bathroom. Margaret, we'll need you to move your sewing room, Sarah informed me one Tuesday morning as if it was already decided. The baby needs that space for a nursery, and it has the best natural light. My sewing room, the one place in the house that was entirely mine, where I kept my grandmother's Singer machine and worked on quilts in the evenings when everyone else was watching television. The place where I found peace after long days of taking care of everyone else's needs. We can set up a little corner for you in the basement, Sarah continued, not noticing my stunned silence. There's plenty of room down there. David nodded along enthusiastically. It makes sense, Mom. We'll need a real nursery, not just a corner somewhere. And you hardly use that room anyway. I hardly used it. I spent hours there every week. It was where I'd sewn David's Halloween costumes when he was little, where I'd altered Linda's prom dresses, where I'd made baby quilts for friends and neighbors. But somehow, in their minds, my hobbies didn't matter because they weren't bringing in money or solving their problems. I need to think about it, I said quietly. Sarah's face changed instantly. The fake sweetness disappeared, replaced by cold irritation. Think about what? It's not like you have a choice here, Margaret. A baby's needs come first. I would think you'd understand that, being a mother yourself. The way she said my name, like it was an annoyance in her mouth. The way she spoke to me like I was a child who needed to be told what was obvious. I felt my face burn with humiliation, but I said nothing. I never said anything. That night, I heard them talking in David's room, my former guest room that had become their master suite without anyone asking my permission. Your mom is being ridiculous about the sewing room, Sarah complained. It's like she doesn't want us to succeed as a family. She'll come around, David replied. She always does. Mom's just dramatic sometimes, but she loves us too much to really cause problems. Dramatic. After everything I'd sacrificed for him, after all the times I'd quietly stepped aside to make his life easier, I was dramatic for wanting to keep one small room in my own house. The next morning, I found Linda going through my kitchen cabinets, pulling out items and putting them in boxes. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Sarah wants to organize the kitchen more efficiently," Linda said without looking up. "She says there's too much clutter and it's not functional for when the baby comes." Clutter. My mixing bowls that had belonged to my mother, my collection of vintage cake pans, my spice rack organized exactly how I liked it. All of it was clutter to them. "Where are you putting my things?" I asked. "Storage," Linda said with a shrug. "You never use half this stuff anyway." There it was again. The assumption that my life, my preferences, my belongings didn't matter because they didn't understand their value. I watched my daughter pack away pieces of my identity like they were garage sale items nobody wanted. I started noticing more things disappearing. My favorite coffee mug was replaced with Sarah's modern set. My comfortable throw pillows vanished, replaced with decorative ones I wasn't allowed to use because they were for show. Even my photographs were moved to make room for Sarah's vision of how a home should look. When I complained gently, they acted like I was being unreasonable. "Mom, change is good," David would say. "This place was stuck in the past. Sarah's helping us modernize." But it wasn't modernizing, it was erasure. They were erasing me from my own life, piece by piece, room by room, until I barely existed in the space I'd worked so hard to create. The worst part wasn't the changes to my house or even the disrespect. The worst part was how they started treating me in front of other people, like my feelings and opinions didn't matter even when we had company. 2 weeks ago, my sister Helen came to visit. I was so excited to see her, to have someone in the house who remembered who I used to be before I became the family doormat. I planned a nice dinner, used my good china, made her favorite pot roast. We were sitting in the living room after dinner, catching up, when Sarah walked in and immediately started rearranging the throw pillows I'd carefully placed. "Margaret, these are all wrong," she said, not acknowledging Helen at all. "I've told you before how these should be arranged. The blue ones go on the sides, not in the middle." I felt my face burn with embarrassment. Helen looked shocked, but I just sat there, paralyzed by my own inability to stand up for myself. "Sarah, this is Margaret's house," Helen said carefully. "Maybe she likes the pillows the way she had them." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Margaret's house? We all live here and we all contribute to making it a home. Just because someone owns something doesn't mean they get to make all the decisions, especially when those decisions affect everyone else." The implication was clear. I might own the house legally, but I had no real authority in it. David walked in during this exchange, and instead of defending me, he sided with his wife. "Mom's kind of stuck in her ways," he told Helen, like I wasn't sitting right there. "Sarah's helping her learn to be more flexible." Helen stayed with me for 3 days, and by the time she left, she was furious on my behalf. "Margaret, what has happened to you?" she asked as I walked her to her car. "You used to have a backbone. You used to stand up for yourself." "They're my children," I said weakly. "I want them to be happy." "And what about your happiness?" Helen demanded. "When was the last time anyone in this house cared about what you wanted?" I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. I'd spent so many years making sure everyone else was comfortable that I'd forgotten what my own comfort looked like. After Helen left, things got even worse. David and Sarah started making decisions without including me at all. They painted the upstairs hallway without asking, choosing a color I hated. They rearranged the furniture in the living room to improve the flow. They invited Sarah's parents for dinner and didn't tell me until the morning of, leaving me to scramble to prepare food for 6 people. "You're so good at this stuff, Mom," Linda said when I complained about the short notice. It's not like it's hard for you. Not hard. Because I'd been doing it for so long, they assumed it required no effort, no planning, no consideration. They assumed I enjoyed being their personal servant. The breaking point came last Sunday. Sarah's mother, Patricia, came for brunch, and I'd spent hours preparing everything perfectly. Homemade biscuits, fresh fruit salad, eggs Benedict, all of Patricia's favorites that Sarah had specifically requested. We were sitting around the dining room table when Patricia complimented the meal. "Sarah, this is absolutely delicious. You're such a wonderful cook." Sarah smiled and accepted the praise without correcting her. My own son sat there and watched his wife take credit for my work and said nothing. "Actually," I said quietly, "I made everything." Sarah was getting ready. The table went silent. Patricia looked confused, Sarah's face went red, and David looked at me like I'd committed some terrible social crime. "Mom," David said through gritted teeth, "no one cares who cooked what. It's not a competition." But it wasn't about competition. It was about recognition, about being seen, about having my contributions acknowledged instead of stolen. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my kitchen and looked around at what my life had become. I was a ghost in my own home, invisible unless someone needed something, dismissed whenever I tried to assert myself. That's when I started planning. I wasn't snooping. I want to make that clear. I was looking for my insurance documents in David's room because he'd organized my important papers and I couldn't find anything. What I found instead changed everything I thought I knew about my family. It was a folder labeled property transfer, sitting on his desk, partially hidden under some other papers. My hands were shaking as I opened it, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Legal documents, plans to transfer the deed of my house into David and Sarah's names, forms that would make me a dependent living in their property, papers that would essentially steal my home right out from under me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the timeline. They'd been planning this for months, carefully documenting every time I'd seemed confused or forgetful, building a case that I was becoming incompetent and needed their help managing my affairs. There were notes in Sarah's handwriting. Margaret couldn't remember where she put the insurance papers today, signs of memory issues, and found Margaret searching through kitchen cabinets looking for her keys, cognitive decline. They were turning my normal, human moments of distraction into evidence of incompetence. Every time I'd misplaced something or forgot a minor detail, they'd been keeping track, building their case to have me declared mentally unfit to manage my own property. I sat on David's bed, holding these papers, and felt my entire world shift. This wasn't just disrespect or taking me for granted. This was calculated theft. They were actively working to steal my house, my security, my independence. The plan was detailed and sophisticated. They'd consulted with lawyers about guardianship, about how to establish financial incompetence, about how to become my legal caretakers with control over my assets. They'd researched assisted living facilities, already planning where to put me once they had control of my property. In Sarah's notes, I found the most devastating line. "Once we have the house and guardianship, we can decide what level of care Margaret really needs. Might be better for everyone if she's in a facility where professionals can watch her." They weren't just planning to steal my house. They were planning to lock me away somewhere so they could live their lives without the inconvenience of having me around. I photographed every document with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to take some pictures twice. Then I put everything back exactly where I'd found it and walked to my bedroom like nothing had happened. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, everything finally making sense. The constant criticism of my memory, the way they questioned my decisions, the suggestions that I was getting confused more often. It wasn't casual cruelty. It was a systematic campaign to undermine my confidence and credibility. Sarah's comments about my sewing room weren't just about the nursery. They were about establishing that I didn't have decision-making authority in my own home. David's dismissive attitude wasn't just disrespect. It was part of a long-term plan to position me as incompetent. Even Linda was in on it. I found text messages on her phone the next day when she left it on the kitchen counter while she showered. Messages to David. Mom seemed really out of it today when I asked her about bills, and should we be worried about her driving? She seemed confused about which way to go to the grocery store. I hadn't been confused about directions. I'd been thinking about taking a different route to avoid construction. But in Linda's report to David, it became evidence of cognitive decline. They were gaslighting me, systematically and deliberately, to steal my home and my independence. And the worst part was how good they were at it. They'd almost convinced me that I really was becoming incompetent, that I really was just a burden they were graciously tolerating. But I wasn't incompetent. I was a woman who'd raised 2 children alone, who'd built a successful career, who'd managed complex financial decisions for decades. I was a woman who'd been so focused on taking care of everyone else that I'd failed to notice they were actively working to destroy me. That realization was like being struck by lightning. Suddenly, every interaction over the past year made sense. Every criticism, every eye roll, every dismissive comment was part of a deliberate strategy to make me doubt myself. Well, I was done doubting myself. It was time to remind my family exactly who they were dealing with. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Martin Rodriguez, the same man who'd handled my divorce 23 years ago. I made the appointment for during work hours when David and Sarah were both out of the house. "Margaret," Martin said when I walked into his office, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," I told him. "The ghost of my future if I don't act fast." I showed him the photographs of the documents, explained the systematic campaign to undermine my competence, detailed the plan to steal my house. Martin's expression grew darker with each piece of evidence. "This is elder abuse," he said flatly. "Financial exploitation combined with psychological manipulation. It's actually criminal." "What can I do?" I asked. Martin leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Well, the good news is that you're clearly competent. You have evidence of their scheme, and the house is unambiguously yours. The bad news is that they're your children, and family court tends to move slowly in these situations." "I don't want to wait for court," I said. "I want them out of my house." "That's trickier. They've established residency." "You can't just change the locks and throw their belongings on the lawn, even though it's your house. We need to be smart about this." We spent 2 hours developing a strategy. Martin explained my rights as a homeowner, the proper procedures for eviction, the ways to protect my assets from future attempts at exploitation. But more importantly, he helped me understand that I had more power than I'd realized. "Margaret, you've been thinking like a victim," he said gently. "But you're not a victim. You're a homeowner, a taxpayer, a competent adult who's been manipulated by people who should have protected you. It's time to start thinking like the person in control, because that's who you actually are." I left Martin's office with a comprehensive plan and something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The next step was securing my finances. I went to the bank and met with my financial advisor, Claire Thompson. I'd been banking there for 15 years, and Claire knew my financial history better than my own children did. "I need to protect my assets," I told her, explaining the situation. "I need to make sure no one can access my accounts or make decisions about my money without my explicit permission." Claire was horrified by what my family had been planning. "Mrs. Chen, you're one of our most financially responsible clients. Your credit is excellent, your savings are substantial, your financial planning has been exemplary for decades. Anyone claiming you're incompetent to manage money is either lying or delusional. We spent the afternoon reorganizing my accounts, setting up additional security protocols, and creating clear documentation of my financial competence. Claire also helped me understand exactly how much my house was worth, substantially more than I'd realized, thanks to years of improvements and a strong real estate market. Your children have been planning to steal approximately $400,000 in assets, Claire told me bluntly. This isn't just family drama, this is serious money. That evening, I started phase 2 of my plan, documentation. I began recording conversations, taking photographs of the conditions they expected me to live in, and keeping detailed notes of every dismissive comment and unreasonable demand. I also started reaching out to people I'd lost touch with over the years, friends who'd drifted away as I became more and more consumed with managing my children's lives. It was humbling to realize how isolated I'd become, how completely I'd wrapped my identity around being their mother. My old friend Joyce from the insurance office was thrilled to hear from me. "Margaret, I was just thinking about you. How are you? How are the kids?" "The kids are adults now," I told her, "and I'm ready to start remembering who I am when I'm not taking care of them." Joyce invited me to lunch, and for the first time in months I said yes to something that was just for me. We met at a cafe downtown, and I felt like I was coming back to life as we talked. "You look tired," Joyce observed. "Are you taking care of yourself?" "I'm learning how," I admitted. "I think I forgot somewhere along the way." Joyce listened as I told her about the situation at home, the gradual erosion of my authority and dignity, the discovery of their scheme. She was furious on my behalf. "Margaret, you raised those children to be independent adults. You weren't supposed to raise them to be parasites," she said bluntly. "You've given them everything, and they're trying to steal what little you kept for yourself." That conversation helped me realize something important. I wasn't being a bad mother by setting boundaries. I was being a good mother by teaching my adult children that actions have consequences. The next week, I did something I hadn't done in years. I joined a support group. Martin had recommended a group for people dealing with financial elder abuse, and though I felt strange attending, I didn't think of myself as elderly at 52, I knew I needed perspective from people who'd faced similar situations. The stories I heard there were both heartbreaking and empowering. Sarah, a 67-year-old retired teacher, had discovered her son was forging checks from her account. Michael, a 59-year-old widower, found out his daughter had been using his credit cards to fund her shopping addiction. Patricia, a 61-year-old grandmother, learned that her son and daughter-in-law were planning to have her declared incompetent so they could sell her house and move to Florida. "The hardest part," Patricia told the group, "isn't the money. It's realizing that the people you love most in the world see you as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected." Everyone nodded. We all understood that particular betrayal, but I also heard success stories. People who'd fought back, who'd reclaimed their independence, who'd learned to set boundaries with manipulative family members. People who discovered that saying no to their children didn't make them bad parents. It made them good examples. "You have to remember," the group facilitator said, "that enabling someone's bad behavior isn't love. It's fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as selfish. But teaching someone to respect boundaries is actually the most loving thing you can do." I started seeing my situation more clearly. I hadn't been loving my children by sacrificing everything for them. I'd been teaching them that my needs didn't matter, that they could treat me however they wanted without consequences, that love meant accepting abuse. The group also gave me practical advice. Several members had successfully evicted adult children who'd refused to contribute or respect boundaries. Others had pursued legal action against family members who'd attempted financial exploitation. Document everything, Patricia advised. Every disrespectful comment, every unreasonable demand, every attempt to undermine your authority. Courts need evidence, not just stories. I'd already started doing that, but the group helped me understand what kinds of evidence would be most compelling. Financial records showing how much I'd spent supporting their lifestyle, documentation of their plans to steal my house, recordings of their dismissive and disrespectful behavior. Meanwhile, at home, I started implementing small changes. I stopped cooking elaborate meals for people who didn't appreciate them. I stopped cleaning up after adults who were perfectly capable of cleaning up after themselves. I stopped paying for things that weren't my responsibility. When Sarah complained that we were out of her favorite coffee creamer, I simply said, "You'll need to buy your own groceries from now on." The shocked look on her face was almost comical. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not responsible for providing food for two healthy adults who are perfectly capable of shopping and cooking for themselves. But we don't have money in the budget for groceries," David protested. "Then you need to adjust your budget," I replied calmly, "or find a place you can afford." So it was a small change, but it felt revolutionary. For the first time in months, I'd said no to an unreasonable expectation and stuck to it. They tried various tactics to get me to back down. Sarah pouted and made passive-aggressive comments about how some families support each other. David tried the guilt trip, reminding me of everything he'd done for me over the years, though when I asked for specific examples, he couldn't come up with many. Linda tried a different approach. She offered to help me manage my money since I was clearly struggling with financial decisions. "I'm not struggling with anything," I told her. "I'm making different choices about how I spend my money." "Mom, you're being weird," Linda said. "This isn't like you." She was right. It wasn't like the person I'd become over the past few years, the doormat who said yes to everything and asked for nothing. But it was exactly like the person I used to be, the woman who'd raised 2 children alone and built a life from nothing. I was remembering who I was before I lost myself in being who they wanted me to be. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd had a particularly good day, lunch with Joyce, a successful meeting with my financial advisor, and a lovely conversation with Helen, who'd called to check on me. I was feeling strong and clear-headed when I walked into my kitchen to find the family meeting that would change everything. David, Sarah, and Linda were sitting around my dining room table with papers spread out in front of them. They looked up when I entered, and I could see the determination in their faces. "Mom, we need to talk," David said, his voice artificially gentle. I knew immediately what this was about. They'd moved up their timeline. Something had made them decide to accelerate their plan to take control of my house and my life. "Of course," I said, sitting down at the head of my own table. "What's on your minds?" Sarah cleared her throat. "Margaret, we've been talking, and we're concerned about you." "Concerned how?" "You've been acting differently lately," Linda said. "More secretive, more defensive. We're worried about your mental state." I almost laughed. Being less available to solve their problems meant I was having mental health issues. Setting boundaries meant I was acting secretively. Refusing to be taken advantage of meant I was being defensive. "Can you be more specific?" I asked calmly. David pulled out a notebook. "You've been forgetting things more often. Last week you couldn't remember where you put the insurance papers. I couldn't find them because you'd moved them without telling me where," I replied. "You've been making poor financial decisions," Sarah added. "Refusing to buy groceries, being unreasonable about household expenses. I've been making different decisions about how I spend my money." Those aren't poor decisions, they're choices you don't like. You see, Linda said to her brother, this is what we're talking about. She's becoming paranoid, defensive about everything. I realized this was it. This was their attempt to create evidence of my incompetence. They were going to claim that my reasonable responses to their unreasonable demands were signs of mental decline, that my refusal to be exploited was evidence of paranoia. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. David leaned forward, his expression earnest and caring. We think you need help, Mom. Sarah and I have been talking to some lawyers about guardianship options. Guardianship, I repeated. Just to help you manage things, Sarah said quickly. You're overwhelmed and we want to take some of the burden off your shoulders. What burden? Managing the house, making financial decisions, handling paperwork, David listed. We could take care of all of that for you. I looked around the table at these 3 people I'd loved and sacrificed for, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. They were actually doing it. They were actually sitting in my house at my table, trying to convince me to sign away my independence. Let me make sure I understand, I said slowly. You want me to give you legal control over my finances and my property because you think I'm too incompetent to manage my own life. We wouldn't put it like that, Linda said uncomfortably. How would you put it? We'd put it like we love you and want to help you, David said. And if I don't agree that I need this help, the 3 of them exchanged glances. Mom, David said carefully, we've already consulted with lawyers. If you're not willing to accept help voluntarily, there are other options. There it was, the threat. Accept their help willingly or they'd pursue legal guardianship against my will. I stood up slowly, my hands perfectly steady despite the rage building inside me. I need some time to think about this. Of course, Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Take all the time you need. We just want what's best for you. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and closed the door. Then I called Martin Rodriguez. They're making their move, I told him. Tonight. They just tried to get me to agree to guardianship. How did you respond? I told them I needed time to think. Good. That gives us time to implement our plan. Are you ready to do this? I looked around my bedroom, at the pictures of my children when they were young and still loved me, at the furniture I'd bought with my own money, at the window that looked out over the garden I'd planted with my own hands. I'm ready, I said. The next morning, I woke up before dawn and began implementing the plan Martin and I had developed. While my family slept in the house I owned, I was taking back control of my life. First stop, the bank. Claire had all the paperwork ready. We closed the joint account that David had access to for household expenses and opened a new account in my name only. We updated all my beneficiary information and established a trust that would prevent anyone from claiming my assets if something happened to me. Your children are going to be very surprised, Claire said as we finished the paperwork. This account they've been accessing has had significant activity. She showed me the records. Over the past year, David and Sarah had been withdrawing money regularly, far more than any reasonable household expenses would justify. They'd been paying their car loans, credit card bills, and personal expenses with my money I'd thought was going toward utilities and groceries. This is theft, I said, staring at the statements. Yes, it is. And now you have documentation of it. Next stop, the locksmith. I had the locks changed on my house, keeping only one key for myself. Then I went to a storage facility and rented a unit for the next phase of my plan. By the time I got home that afternoon, I was calm and ready for what came next. I found them in the living room, apparently having another family meeting about my situation. Now they looked up when I walked in, and I could see the expectation in their faces. They thought I'd come to accept their generous offer to steal my life. I've made my decision, I announced. Great, David said, standing up. I think you'll find that letting us help will be a huge relief. You're right, I said. It will be a relief. Sarah, David, Linda, you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The silence that followed was profound. They stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. What? Sarah said finally. You have 30 days to move out of my house, I repeated clearly. All of you. Mom, you can't be serious, Linda said. I'm completely serious. I've consulted with my lawyer, and as the sole owner of this property, I have every right to determine who lives here. I no longer want any of you living in my home. David's face was turning red. You can't just kick us out. We live here. You live here because I've allowed you to live here. That permission is revoked. But I'm pregnant, Sarah shrieked. You can't evict a pregnant woman. I'm not evicting anyone. I'm giving you 30 days' notice to find alternative housing arrangements, which is more than legally required since you've never paid rent or signed a lease. Mom, what's gotten into you? Linda demanded. This is crazy. What's crazy is that 3 healthy adults have been living in my house rent-free while planning to steal it from me, I replied calmly. What's crazy is that I've been supporting you financially while you call me incompetent. What's crazy is that I've been cooking and cleaning for people who treat me like hired help. We never treated you like hired help, David protested. Yesterday you tried to convince me I was too mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. Today, Sarah took credit for my cooking in front of her mother. Last week, Linda threw away my belongings without asking. If that's not treating me like hired help, it's treating me worse than hired help. Sarah started crying, but they weren't real tears. They were performance tears designed to manipulate me into backing down. Margaret, please, think about the baby. Think about your grandchild. I am thinking about my grandchild, I said. I'm thinking that a child deserves parents who are responsible enough to provide their own housing instead of stealing from family members. We weren't stealing, David shouted. I pulled out my phone and showed them the bank statements Claire had printed. You've withdrawn $12,000 from my account in the past year for personal expenses that had nothing to do with household costs. That's theft. David's face went white. That money was for household expenses. Your car payment is not a household expense. Sarah's credit card bills are not household expenses. Your student loan payments are not household expenses. You said we could use that account for expenses, Linda said. I said you could use it for your share of utilities and groceries. I didn't say you could pay your personal bills with my money while planning to have me declared incompetent. The room went dead silent. They realized I knew about their plan. How did you... Sarah started. How did I find out that you've been documenting my every forgotten key and missed appointment as evidence of cognitive decline? How did I discover that you've been consulting with lawyers about guardianship? How did I learn that you've already picked out the assisted living facility where you plan to warehouse me after you steal my house? David looked like he was going to be sick. Mom, we can explain... There's nothing to explain. You've shown me exactly who you are and what you think of me. Now I'm showing you who I am and what I think of this situation. You're nothing to this family, David suddenly exploded, his facade of concern dropping completely. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see us happy. Leave now. And there it was. The thing he'd been thinking all along, finally spoken out loud. The words that revealed what he really thought of the woman who'd raised him, supported him, sacrificed everything for him. This is my house, I said quietly, and you're the ones who are leaving. That confrontation was 3 months ago. The 30 days that followed were difficult, filled with lawyers, accusations, and attempts by my children to paint me as mentally unstable. But I had evidence, documentation, and witnesses to their behavior. Most importantly, I had Martin Rodriguez, who didn't let them intimidate me. They tried everything. David claimed I owed him money for improvements he'd made to the house. Improvements that turned out to be painting one room and installing a ceiling fan. Sarah threatened to keep me from seeing my grandchild, not understanding that threats only reinforced my decision. Linda alternately begged and screamed, trying to find some combination of manipulation that would work. But I'd learned something important in those 30 days. I was stronger than I'd realized. Every time they tried to make me feel guilty, I remembered the documents detailing their plan to steal my house. Every time they accused me of being selfish, I remembered the bank statements showing how they'd stolen my money. Every time they claimed I was mentally incompetent, I looked around at the well-organized life I'd built and maintained for decades. They moved out on day 29, still angry, still claiming I was wrong. David and Sarah found a small apartment across town. Linda moved in with a friend. They spoke to me only through lawyers for the first month, trying to find some legal way to force me to take them back or give them money. But Martin had done his job well. Every document was in order. Every legal protection was in place. There was no legitimate way for them to challenge my decisions or access my assets. The first month alone in my house was strange. I kept expecting to hear Sarah's voice criticizing my decor or David's demands for money. I kept waiting for Linda to leave her dishes in my sink or her laundry in my machine. Instead, I heard silence, and slowly that silence became peaceful instead of lonely. I started reclaiming my space, room by room. I moved back into my sewing room and spent hours working on projects I'd abandoned when life became about managing everyone else's crises. I rearranged my furniture the way I liked it. I put my photographs back on the mantel. I cooked meals I enjoyed instead of meals designed to please ungrateful critics. I also started rebuilding relationships I'd neglected. Joyce and I became close friends again, meeting for lunch every week and planning a vacation together. Helen visited more often, amazed by the change in me. "You look like yourself again," she said during her last visit. "I'd forgotten how strong you used to be." The support group became a crucial part of my recovery. Hearing other people's stories of family exploitation helped me understand that what had happened to me wasn't unique, wasn't my fault, and wasn't something I had to accept. Patricia became a particularly close friend. She'd successfully evicted her son and daughter-in-law and was rebuilding her life at 61. "The hardest part," she told me, "isn't learning to live without them. It's learning to forgive yourself for allowing it to go on so long." She was right. I spent many nights replaying the years of small concessions, the gradual erosion of my boundaries, the slow process by which I'd become invisible in my own life. But my therapist, another new addition to my life, helped me understand that recognizing manipulation doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. "You loved your children," Dr. Martinez explained. "You wanted to help them succeed. Those aren't character flaws. The problem wasn't your love. It was their willingness to exploit it." 3 months after they moved out, Sarah had the baby, a daughter they named Emma. David called to tell me, his voice carefully neutral. "I thought you should know you have a granddaughter," he said. "Thank you for telling me," I replied. "Would you like to meet her?" I thought about it carefully. "When you're ready to have a relationship based on mutual respect, I'd love to meet my granddaughter. But I won't be manipulated or disrespected because I'm excited about being a grandmother." There was a long pause. "Mom, we could really use help with childcare costs." And there it was. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement of what they'd done, but another attempt to use me as a financial resource. "David, I hope you're both wonderful parents, but your childcare costs are your responsibility, not mine. So you're just going to abandon your own grandchild?" he asked, trying one more guilt trip. "I'm going to be available for a relationship when you're ready to treat me with respect. Until then, I'm going to live my life. I hung up, feeling sad but not guilty. I wanted to know my granddaughter, but not at the cost of returning to a dynamic where I was valued only for what I could provide. 6 months later, I got a different kind of call. Linda, crying, apologizing, asking if she could come over to talk. "I've been thinking about everything that happened," she said when she arrived at my door. "I was horrible to you. We all were." "Yes, you were," I agreed, not sugarcoating it. "I want to make it right," she said. "I want to have a real relationship with you, not just use you." It was a start. We began meeting for coffee once a week, slowly rebuilding trust. Linda was learning to support herself, taking responsibility for her own life instead of expecting me to solve her problems. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks, but we were both committed to creating something healthier. David and Sarah took longer. It was almost a year before they reached out, motivated partly by their struggles with parenting and partly by their financial difficulties. They discovered that adult life was harder when you couldn't rely on someone else to pay your bills and solve your problems. Today we have limited contact. Limited. I've met Emma, who is beautiful and perfect and deserves grandparents who model healthy relationships. David and Sarah are slowly learning to treat me with respect, understanding that access to my life is contingent on their behavior. But the most important relationship I rebuilt was with myself. I remembered that I'm a competent, intelligent woman who deserves respect. I rediscovered interests and friendships I'd abandoned. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. My house feels like home again. It's a space that reflects my taste, my comfort, my life. When I sit in my living room in the evenings, working on a quilt or reading a book, I feel peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. To anyone watching this story who recognizes themselves in my experience, you are not responsible for making other people happy at the expense of your own well-being. You are not obligated to accept disrespect from people just because you love them. You have the right to set boundaries, to demand respect, to protect your assets and your peace of mind. It's never too late to reclaim your life. It's never too late to remember who you are when you're not busy being what everyone else needs you to be. And if you're wondering whether I regret my decision to evict my children from my house, I don't. For the first time in years, I'm living in my own home instead of being a guest in someone else's vision of my life. That's not selfish. That's survival. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, you deserve respect, you deserve peace, and you deserve to be valued for who you are, not just what you can provide. You are stronger than you know.